In the Pacific Northwest and in the West in general, there's loads of secessionist movements. There's one that's been going on for over a century in Southern Oregon and also Northern California called the State of Jefferson. And they wanted to secede and form their own state, form a 51st state. And they actually did secede. They voted and seceded just before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And they elected a governor. It was about 7 counties in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And it was mostly for economic reasons. They didn't think the U.S. was doing enough to support timber and mineral extraction in the area, so for example, building roads and building logging roads. And so they voted to secede. It was actually a national story. There were the newsreels were there from all over the world. It was set to play in theaters on December 8th. And then December 7th, 1941 occurred, and Pearl Harbor was the only story. And they actually dropped they dropped their plans for secession at that point. But until then, they had, for example, they'd close the highway entering the State of Jefferson and leaving the State of Jefferson. And they set up basically border crossing coming in, and it was all relative. I mean, they did have guns, but it was all, I think, relatively friendly. They would hand out brochures and stickers that said, "I have entered the State of Jefferson." People put them on their windshields. Even today, the streets around there and the highways have "Welcome to State of Jefferson" signs and things. And now it's become a kind of quaint bit of history, really, more than anything else. Although there's people who they remain very active and somewhat serious about it. The radio station there is called State of Jefferson Radio. So all of that is to say that that's one of many of these secessionist movements. In the novel, it's more of a left-wing secessionist movement. And as I said, it's a very fledgling movement. They don't know if they want to become their own country, if they want to form a 51st state. They don't even know the boundaries when Scanlon arrives, and they're mostly, like good liberal groups, they're really into process and they're really into discussions. So mostly they're discussing and arguing and eating brownies and drinking coffee. And and one of the things they love about Scanlon is he shows up with this whole sort of academic framework. And as Scanlon calls it, the blueprint for success. He not only believes himself that he could actually, perhaps as unrealistic as it seems, pull this off in some small way, but he certainly convinces, or the group convinces themselves, that with his leadership they could succeed. I'm lucky enough to live in a place where we have anarchists. When I was writing about anarchists, I could talk to some anarchists. And I got a friend of mine who was actually a former student who introduced me to a few anarchists in Corvallis. One of my first great lessons of anarchy was I made an appointment with these guys to meet them at a coffee shop, and they didn't show up. And I thought, this is anarchy. So eventually they did show up, and I discovered, of course, that anarchists are as complicated as anybody else, and they are as hypocritical as anybody else. They have these very strong principles they live by, which they break daily. And I hope that I've been able to, in the character of Clay, present a complicated human being who is in part defined by his belief that anarchy is the answer for many or most of the problems in the world. The idea of writing this novel that involved a secessionist movement came to me when I still lived in California and didn't know that I was moving to Oregon. It seemed like a kind of gift, because I could have, if I'd ended up getting a job in Amherst, I think that it would have been a lot tougher to set my novel there. Oregon is the perfect setting for a novel that involves these fringy political movements, because it's so full of them, it's so rich with them.